And you were saying that you're from a Pathan family which was settled in Jalandhar.
Yes, they settled the time of Shah Jahan, I would say, and we were there as separate communities living around London, of Jalandhar. About there's 11 and 12 settlements living off the land. We bought the lands, our forefathers had bought the lands, and so we were basically farmers.
And in the summer of 47, you were in Lahore.
I was in Lahore when the partition happened. And then the trouble started, and I think it must have been 16th or 17th of August that I went home, because I learned that there was a lot of trouble and I was anxious about my family. So I went, and my brother went with me. We managed to get hold of a truck, and we brought about something like 50 of our women to Lahore, because the others then they could follow in their own way, but we were really very apprehensive about what might happen to the women. And as we were coming back, we were not sure whether we would make it, even though we had some escort in the shape of a ambulance, army ambulance, and a jamadar who were bringing some of the wounded from East Punjab to Lahore.
How bad were things in Jalandhar at that time?
Well, as we came into the city from Lahore, and our truck was going through to the cantonment, all the Muslims were already walking out to a refugee camp which was set up in the cantonment. And this was happening although Jalandhar city itself was a Muslim majority area. But they had to get out because they were being attacked all the time. Their houses were being set on fire. I could see the smoke rising over the city. But I must say that I would say it probably started there deliberately. It was started in East Punjab. But the Muslims in West Punjab did more or less the same things, started retaliating and doing the same things. So it was just sheer madness on both sides.
Your family, your community in Jalandhar were conservative?
Yes, I would say by and large they were conservative, yes.
And the women that you were...
They were wearing their burqas, sitting on top of... we allowed each one to have one piece of baggage, suitcase or whatever, put it there, and on top of that sat all the women. I don't know, looking like mushrooms, I don't know, white mushrooms, I don't know, something like that. But it was quite an unusual sight.
And they were wearing white burqas?
That's right. They were all wearing burqas. None of our women wear burqas now, but at that time they all did wear burqas. So that's why perhaps I would say they were even more vulnerable than the others. But we managed, thank God it was all right. And the rest of our family, the rest of the community, they all eventually came out without any trouble.
Were you surprised that Punjabi Muslims or Muslims living in Punjab had to flee? Was it something...
It's unheard of. Nobody could have ever imagined that where we've been living for centuries, we would have to get out. Nobody could imagine this. I'm sure the same applies to the Hindus and Sikhs in West Punjab. For example, Rawalpindi was basically a Sikh city. Most of the properties, the houses, they all belong to Sikhs. They have a holy place here, not very far from here, in Hassan Abdal. I don't think they would have ever imagined that they'll have to get out, but they did.
Were you involved in the Muslim League at all?
Not at all. I have never been involved in any political party, right till now. Because as you know, I'm a journalist. Once I became a journalist, this is the older tradition, let us say. It's no longer true probably here in these parts. If you were a journalist, you had no business to belong to any political party. You may naturally, like everyone else, have some sympathies, but I know I had nothing to do with the Muslim League.
Jinnah presented Pakistan as a homeland for Indian Muslims. I've listened to some of his speeches where he exhorts people to live by the Quran. But from what you witnessed, from what you remember, what was the main inspiration for people to come to Pakistan and to support the idea of Pakistan? Was it religious or otherwise?
Well, first of all, I don't agree that he encouraged them to come to Pakistan. Not at all. I don't think he did that. As far as the basis on which he asked for Pakistan, I don't think it was religion, not at all. It was religious in the sense that the Muslim community was a depressed community in India. Most of the businesses, jobs, etc., they were hand in the other communities. And there was an apprehension on the basis of some experience in the United Provinces after the 1936 election, when the Congress party totally ignored the Muslim League. There was an apprehension that a Muslim community would be swamped and they would not have the proper chance to come up economically and socially, etc. Basically, it was this. Religious is only in the sense that these people you happen to be Muslims, and the other side there were Hindus and others. That's all. I don't think even his speeches. If you go back to his speeches, he doesn't talk like a man who thought in terms of Muslims or Hindus. He said, this is the personal affair, this is the personal business. And he was very much against any kind of theocracy. No, I wouldn't say that. But I'm afraid that in Pakistan a great deal of I don't know how to put it, whitewashing of what Jinnah stood for and tried to circumcise it, if you like, to make him a true Muslim, and which is not true, which is not true at all. I wouldn't say that.
But for those who supported the Pakistan idea, for those who voted for the Muslim League, was their main motivation religious, communal, or economic?
The way I have put it, that was exactly their motivation. I was old enough to know what their thinking was, and another thing one has to bear in mind, the voting, even in 46, it was not adult franchise basis. There were qualifications. Either you had to have some property or you were educated. The vote was not given to all the people. So when the voting took place, it was basically, I would say, the middle classes, the better off, economically better off classes who voted.
And they thought Pakistan would help them in commercial, economic...
They helped them in the socially and economically and the preservation of their way of life, etc. That they won't be swamped by a very an overwhelming Hindu majority. It was overwhelming, there's no doubt. That was the idea. And I think they would have settled for what was agreed under the cabinet mission plan, 3 zones, one in the east of Muslim majority areas, one in the west Muslim majority area, and India in the middle, with 3 subjects for the federal government, that is to say foreign affairs, defense, and I think either it was currency or finance. The rest was to be used, was given to these 3 federating units to run their own show in their own way. I think that was the best possible arrangement, which Jinnah had very gladly accepted, which eventually Mr. Nehru and Patel repudiated just in March 47, and then followed the creation of Pakistan, because I think they had decided that these people are too troublesome and let them go and have their own. There are theories about it that they thought it will not last so very long. And they did make the effort, don't forget, because apart from the military stores, the Pakistan's share of the money that the government of India had was not paid to Pakistan until Mahatma Gandhi went on hunger strike. This was very bad, you must pay. And I must say that Mahatma Gandhi was genuinely a Mahatma the last 4 or 5 years of his life. Before that, he was a politician, no matter what the Hindus called him, but he was genuinely a Mahatma in those times. And that's why I suppose he had to pay with his life. But he had to go on hunger strike, and then the money was given. So the effort obviously was on that let it collapse, and they'll then come on their knees to us, please take us back.
Did you support the creation of Pakistan at that time?
Not, I wasn't one of those ardent supporters of Pakistan as such, but I thought perhaps it's a good way of doing it, but I certainly don't think I was very enthused by the way things were going, and for that I don't blame Jinnah at all, because as I say, he would have settled for less than Pakistan. He had settled for less than Pakistan. Once these things began and once the killings began, I thought perhaps Pakistan was the answer.
And do you think its creation has been justified by history?
No, this is one of those questions which is not easily answered, but I would say it's certainly not justified. And the reason I would say is not because it came about. The reason is the total absolute failure of those people who are in Pakistan. They have not made anything of it. In that sense, one would say that it's not justified. If we couldn't run it properly and we are in a mess, as anyone can see, then we had no right to have a separate state. This will not be a very popular view in Pakistan, but I'm afraid that's my view.
And who do you blame?
The people of Pakistan, and of course those who ran this country. And basically the country was run from the this is the basic difference between India and Pakistan's history. That is to say, whereas India had elected representative governments throughout and formulated an agreed constitution very quickly, here the bureaucracies, that is to say the civil bureaucracies and especially the military bureaucracies, they thought it was their birthright to run this country, and they never bothered with framing a constitution, with election. The first proper election Pakistan had was in as late as 1970. Before that, it was all mishmash. So naturally, the country was never allowed to settle down. And I would blame basically these elements. Then of course you can put in the feudals who also manipulated many things in those days, and they were relevant because they were influential in their own country. But once the 70 election took place, the feudals were not that powerful. And today I would say they're not that powerful. In fact, the robber barons are more powerful. They control the economy of this country. So the failure is of people who were supposed to run this country. It's not the failure of the people. They had never been given a chance. Briefly, they were given a chance in the 70s. And then the army moved again and removed an elected government. So, no, on balance I would say, because what's going on in India is also not very reassuring by partly the way things have gone. So what's going on in Kashmir, or if Muslims are not having their proper share in India, that's also one of the consequences of partition. That is to say, if we all had been there, it may have been a different story, because we would have met Muslims of India, that is to say putting Pakistan and Bangladesh in, would have had much bigger clout than the Muslims of India have today. So in that sense also, but I'm afraid one thing I must say, we have made a mess and it's our fault. But what we have come to, I would blame, after the creation of Pakistan, I would blame the Indians more than Pakistanis, because if they had been just a little bit generous, many of the things would have never happened. I'm afraid they didn't do that. Kashmir, what is Kashmir? Kashmir problem could have been solved 20 years ago if they had had a proper election there, free election, and given a few liberties to them to run their own show, there would have been none of this agitation. It would have all stopped, but they wouldn't do that. They didn't have any free elections. They didn't let them run their own show. Of course, a vast number of young people have come out through universities, etc., and they don't find jobs. So naturally, all this has created the problem. Even today, I would say it's the same. That is the answer, but I don't think the Indians will do it. I don't think. If Pakistanis were in the same position, I think they would have taken the same position. I mean, I know we are much alike in these things. But even today, that is the only answer.
But you seem to be saying that for Indian Muslims, partition was a cul-de-sac.
It was, and they are largely to blame themselves because they are very, very prominent. I'm not saying the Indian Muslims are today, but their forefathers were very much in the forefront for the creation of Pakistan.
And for muhajirs, this hasn't been the promised land either.
The muhajirs, is that the whole thing is now become distorted. The muhajirs are not those, the ones we talk about being muhajirs today, they are not the ones who were hounded out of India, not at all. They came voluntarily. They are economic refugees, basically. And once Liaquat Ali Khan had encouraged some of them to come to Karachi because he had no constituency in Pakistan, then their relations started following and went on. And now, of course, in recent years, there's been a flood. But that they are not, I wouldn't call them muhajirs. They came on their own, and they were not necessarily victimized or in danger of their lives. They came looking for economic opportunity. That's a very different case. The ones who came when I brought my family out, yes, they were the real muhajirs because they were expelled. Otherwise, they would have been killed on both sides. And the figure mentioned, as you know, is that 500,000 Muslims and 500,000 Sikhs and Hindus were killed in that horrible experience. And this is another thing. Within 3 months, 6 million Muslims came out of East Punjab into West, and about the same number of Hindus and Sikhs moved from here to East Punjab. I mean, it's just, one can't imagine the horror of it. Of course, I saw it myself. They had to do it within 3 months. They were the muhajirs, they were the refugees. The ones in Karachi who are talking about it, they're just merely exploiting it as a kind of weapon. They're not, in that sense, the refugees they came looking for better economic opportunities.
One MQM leader I met in Karachi talked dismissively of overnight Pakistanis, by which he meant basically Punjabis.
Well, I don't know. Punjabis voted the Muslim League, gave the votes. Punjabis, as I said, Muslims lost 500,000 of their people in that migration, and they all came and settled in West Pakistan. At least they don't say that we are refugees. But the muhajirs, they've been coming for 40 years in their own good time. And now they still want to be regarded as muhajirs, which I think is a bit too much. They've been there, their fathers have been there, in some cases their grandfathers have been there. They are Pakistanis like anyone else. I'm afraid that's a continuation of the same old story where certain kind of politicians exploit a situation to their own advantage by presenting all kinds of distorted facts which are distorted. I think that's the case here. I have actually written about it. They didn't like it, but I have written about it and brought out that these are the facts. You want to continue to remain muhajirs, that's your choice. I can't do anything about it. But you are not muhajirs anymore.